करिए शुरू.
हाँ सर.
Okay.
Can I just make an introduction, sir?
Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. Today's distinguished speaker is Mr. Amar Bhatt. We all know him. He is a senior member of our bar. He has an excellent academic record. He has been he has stood first rank and received gold medals on numerous occasions. He has graduated from Columbia University, which is one of the prestigious universities of the United States. He is also a poet and a renowned singer, which we all know. Thank you, sir, for accepting this and conducting this session. The lecture are divided in two parts. Today, Mr. Bhatt will be covering history and development of principles of natural justice, judgments of English code and our courts, basic provisions, and first facet of natural justice, which is doctrine of bias. The second session will be conducted day after tomorrow on Thursday, where he will be dealing with two other facets of natural justice, being right of hearing and reasoned order, and exclusion of principle of natural justice. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Archit. Good morning to all of you. It is indeed a pleasure meeting you all this way. First of all, Archit, I am not a poet. I do sing poetry written by others. My mother wanted me to write poems, but then I told her that I do write, but I do write the petitions, High Court petitions, not poems. But let me share with you a poem of Tagore. When I am doing nothing these days, this poem has given great comfort to me. It's only a one-line poem, the first part. Let my doing nothing, when I have nothing to do, become untroubled in its depth of peace, like the evening in the seashore when the water is silent. So I wish that let your not doing anything also be as peaceful, as untroubled. I'm also reminded of an interview of cricketer Rahul Dravid. He was asked as to what he would be doing when he was dropped or not playing cricket. And then he answered that he would be going back to basics. So this webinar is in a way going back to basics when we are not doing anything. That is how I looked at it. And topic is well known, principles of natural justice. Violation of principles of natural justice is one of the most used phrases in 226 petition. So, I mean, you all are aware about this basic concept, broad concept, but I want to just have an overview and also try to see how it has evolved, how these principles have evolved. If I go to the topics that I intend to cover, first is what is natural justice? Brief history. Here I intend to cover from Latin to English, Greece to Rome to England and then India, how these principles have evolved. It's a history, I know, but it is very interesting. And that is why I want all of you to kindly go through this history. Next is the question, first to follow, they can be enforced. Against they can be. Second point, I was on the second point, who has to follow or against whom they can be enforced. We know that judiciary is supposed to follow principles of natural justice, grant or afford hearing to everyone. We also know that quasi-judicial authorities are also required to follow these principles. But what about the administrative authorities? For that, we need to go to which are two separate sections and brief discussion on each of them. First is absence of bias. jurists have developed different kinds of biases for the purposes of theory, and that those three biases, when the principles of bias will not be applicable, that also I want to go. Then is the important thing, opportunity of hearing. What are the contours of or aspects of hearing? We know court-like hearing has many things, civil procedure codes, criminal procedure code, they all have procedures. But when we go to hearing before quasi-judicial or administrative authorities, then what are these? What are the contours or what are the aspects of hearing? Does it include oral arguments? Does it include right to be represented by a lawyer? Does it include right to cross-examine a witness? If yes, under what circumstances? These all I intend to cover. And lastly, about the natural justice, the third principle is reasoned order. Now, when I was studying in law, second year LLB, this was not considered as part of principles of natural justice. I mean, the orders were required to be reasoned orders, and if the orders were unreasoned, anyone could challenge it on the ground of arbitrariness, but they were not considered part of principles of natural justice. The later development is that now reasoned order is also considered as part of principles of natural justice. As you know, we all are conversant with the phrase that natural justice is not a straitjacket formula. It is a developing law. It is a judge-made law. It is developed by cases. So that is why cases are important. We have tried to give important cases. Archit has circulated those cases also. Some cases we will need to discuss, that we will do. And last is the exclusion of principles of natural justice. The principle, when it will not be applicable. What about post-decisional hearing? What are the recent trends? All these things I intend to cover in the last topic. For today's webinar, I think we will be stopping at absence of bias. And at the end of each webinar, I intend to raise some questions and possibly not answer them, because I like to enjoy questions. They are not capable of being instantly answered, but they are for brainstorming. So that is what I intend to do after every webinar. With this background, I will go to the history. What is natural justice and brief history and evolution. We know that this term has been derived from jus natural. It's a Latin phrase, and it means natural law or law of nature. It is documented in Greek philosophy of Aristotle. It is also found in the works of Cicero, which was 106 BC in Rome. It is in Roman language. He was considered to be a great orator and was supposed to be the first legal philosopher. I remember Professor Niranjan Bhagat, a famous poet and an expert on European literature. He used to speak out dialogues and dialogues of Cicero, of course in English. So that is how works of Cicero are important to find out this natural law theory. Archit, can we have the first slide again, where, no, the PDF, where Tagore's poem was there. There, you will notice that I have tried to mention in Greece. If now we come to Greece, so Demosthenes, he was again a legal scholar, and he has mentioned that a judicial oath that the judge had to take included a promise to hear equally the prosecutor and the defendant. So ordinary laws of Athens were also based on this concept. In Rome, those of you who are watching Roman Empire on Netflix, it's a beautiful series, are probably, you are aware about Claudius. He was a Roman king, he was known for giving one-sided justice. Now, Suetonius, I have mentioned his name, Suetonius. In fact, he was a historian. He has covered the rule of 12 Roman empires, 12 Roman kings rather. So Suetonius mentions an incident. A lawyer thanked Claudius once for allowing the accused to make his defense, because Claudius was known to be arbitrary. He was known to be giving one-sided justice. So the lawyer in fact thanked him that you have allowed the accused to make his defense. And thereafter what he spoke was very pertinent. That is recorded in Suetonius' history, that of course it is the custom. So natural law, hearing a person before taking any decision was considered to be a part of custom. It was customary to hear and then decide. Now, go back to the slides. Again, I remember Professor Niranjan Bhagat, who also was speaking about the Italian playwright Seneca, Roman playwright. The slides, Archit, the slides. Please go back to the slides. Next. Yes, Seneca. His play was Medea. It was a Roman tragedy with Greek subject. And he mentioned two things as dialogues. These were the dialogues in the play. Kindly mark that. So even in the plays, these were the dialogues. First question was, did you hear the person before he suffered the punishment? And second question was, he who shall decide anything without hearing other side will not have done what is right, although he may have said what is right. So this was again a part of custom. You will notice that in the plays also, these dialogues, trying to hear out a person, these were part of their ordinary. They were so much imbibed in the people. His another play, Controversia, it is also mentioned somewhere that the accused is shown to be complaining to the judge that you are not hearing me. So this is how hearing was conceived in those days, fully hearing a person and then giving the punishment or then deciding the case. Then this natural law or law of nature, just natural, was it a law of jungle? Then answer was no. But it was meant to be a higher law of nature. Certain code of conduct was found so just that they were thought to be binding on all mankind. So that is how this law of nature was understood. Not anything, not law of jungle or anything like that, but law of nature. Then we had in England Magna Carta in 1215, the Great Charter, which recognized two rights in which also this concept is imbibed. It recognized the right to justice and right to fair trial. Next is, I'm impressed by the judges of those times. Sir Matthew Hale, he was the Chief Justice of the King's Bench in 1670s. And he had given 18 tenets to be followed by judges. In that, the sixth tenet was that I suffer not myself to be possessed with any judgment at all till the whole business of both parties be heard. So there also, as one of the tenets to be followed by a judge, this was imbibed or this was incorporated. From all this, we get two things. What were this law of nature? Please go to next slide. Two aspects became relevant from this. First was no prejudging and hear both the sides. If you read Sir Matthew Hale's tenet again, I suffer not myself to be possessed with any judgment. So no prejudging. until both parties are heard. So hear both sides. Until 2 centuries ago, natural law and natural justice were used interchangeably. Their initial application was restricted only to judiciary, and then from 19th century onwards, the English courts started applying them to those whose duty was to decide judicially. That is, we present day call quasi-judicial authorities. Higher courts started applying these principles to control the decisions of the lower courts and also other quasi-judicial authorities. Now coming to India, we get from Kautilya's Arthashastra, there is a chapter on administration of justice. And one requirement for a judge is that he has mentioned is impartiality. Next, we come to India after Constitution. This is the first case in which Justice Vivian Bose mentioned about principles of natural justice after we got our Constitution. When he mentioned, what I mean is that he, in fact, slightly elaborated to a great length this concept. I have briefly mentioned the case. The case is also given to you. It arose from an election petition to cancel the election of S. S is the petitioner Sangram Singh. Before the tribunal, under the Representation of People Act, B was Bhurelal, filed a petition to cancel the election of Sangram Singh. For several dates, Sangram Singh did not appear, either personally or through his lawyers. The tribunal then proceeded to record the evidence of few witnesses. Thereafter, Sangram Singh appeared and applied for permission to cross-examine the witnesses whose evidence was recorded. The tribunal obviously rejected the request. High Court also requested the challenge. And then when the matter went to the Supreme Court, kindly see what Justice Vivian Bose had to say. The Act provided that procedure of CPC for trial of suits will be applicable. Next page is the quotation from this judgment. Justice Vivian Bose, if you hear Justice Nariman's, Rohinton Nariman's speeches on YouTube, he has spoken very highly about Justice Vivian Bose. Vivian Bose beautifully summarized these principles. Next, there must be ever present to the mind the fact that our laws of procedure are grounded on a principle of natural justice, which requires that man should not be condemned unheard, that decisions should be reached should not be reached behind their backs, that proceedings that affect their lives and property should not continue in their absence, and that they should not be precluded from participating in them. So this is how natural justice came to India, in the sense of interpreting procedure of CPC, keeping in mind principles of natural justice. Those of you who are interested in this historical aspect, there is a beautiful paper with me. You can contact Archit or me. It is a paper from Notre Dame Law School, where this Greco-Roman history is beautifully digested, and it is worth reading. It is a piece of literature in a way. As and when you want it, please do contact me. This is about history. So you will notice that original term was just natural, then it became natural law, then natural justice. Two principles were evolved: absence of bias and opportunities of hearing. And their application, which was initially restricted to judiciary, their application now also went to the orders of quasi-judicial authorities. Now, the cases, next slide, I have just summarized the cases which are important. The cases are given also. Lord Denning, I'm coming to the fourth of that. Lord Denning beautifully explained this absence of bias and opportunity of hearing in one word each: impartiality and fairness. It was a Privy Council decision. I have mentioned the facts. In departmental inquiry, the appellant was not given the copy of the report, which was prejudicial to him, though copy of it was given to the adjudicating officer before inquiry. Then Justice Denning, Lord Denning says that if a right to be heard is to be a real right, it must carry with it the right on the accused man to know the case which is made against him. He must know what evidence has been given and what statements have been made affecting him. And then he must be given a fair opportunity to correct or contradict him. So in modern context, the principles of natural justice now have become, or now have come to be understood as fairness in action. This is about a brief history. It's only an overview. Each point can be elaborated with historical data, but for the time being, it is, I think, enough that how it has come to India, natural justice. Then comes the question, who has to follow or against whom natural justice can be enforced. Now, these principles you have studied in the second year law, at least I studied it in second year law. These are the basic constitutional principles for any democratic state. Now, why do I refer to it? Why do I refer to these principles? Because here now natural justice is included in the subject of administrative law. We are concerned with powers of administrative authorities. When there are powers, there have to be checks and balances on the exercise of that power. So that power has flown from the doctrine of separation of power. So that is why these two concepts are, let us, even if you are aware about it, let us refresh them. Then first is rule of law given by English jurist Dicey. Equality before law and equal protection of law. That is how Dicey thought it. And Article 14 of our Constitution does cover that. Next is the another rule: no person shall be deprived of his life and personal liberty except by due process of law. Our article uses the words procedure established by law, but what was provided by Dicey was due process of law. Now here I have mentioned Justice Khanna's dissent for the purpose of historical reference. ADM Jabalpur case was a known case. You know that it is also known as habeas corpus case. And in that, several political leaders during emergency were taken under custody and a habeas corpus petition was filed. The argument for the center was that the fundamental rights are suspended. Rule of law is there because of Article 14. Rule of law is there in the sense no arrest or nothing, no deprivation of life and liberty was under Article 21. But since Article 21 is suspended, there is no question of rule of law and therefore it can't be applied. Now Justice Khanna gave a dissenting judgment. And there he said that rule of law is merely recognized under Article 21. It was already there. Rule of law is not there because of Article 21, but Article 21 merely recognizes this rule of law. And for that, he relied upon Lord Mansfield's judgment in the case of James Somerset. I've taken this last line from this book, The Literature of the Law. And the facts were that there was a slave who was being taken from Jamaica to Africa, and then they were near London, and the slave cried for help, and a petition was filed for habeas corpus. The argument for the owner of the slave was that the slave had no right to claim due process. then the judge, Lord Mansfield, said this beautiful sentence, which is a piece of, again, literature, and that is why it is covered in this literature of the law. The air of England is too pure for the slave to breathe. Let the black go free. So that is how the rule of law is established. Now, of course, this minority view of Justice Khanna is now, in fact, the rule of law. In fact, it is approved by the Supreme Court recently. And Justice Dhananjay Chandrachud had the occasion to reverse his father, Justice Y.V. Chandrachud's judgment. Next slide is about separation of powers. Montesquieu was a French jurist, and then he gave this concept, that separation of powers. Legislature legislates, judiciary interprets what is legislated, and the executive implements the law, implements what is legislated. So these, according to him, there were three clear-cut demarcations. One organ cannot perform the functions meant to be performed by other organs. That is why if you go to France, there are clear-cut divisions. In US Constitution also, there is this division visible in the Constitution. But in India, is there such clear-cut division? That is a question. Now, next slide, please. With the passage of time, the functions of administrative wing did not remain limited to what is described in 3. Means it is not restricted to merely administering the law or merely maintaining law and order, but the administrative authorities are supposed to perform many more functions. Legislature, by enacting a law, gives them rule-making power. So they have to, legislate in a way, frame rules. So that is why they are performing certain legislative functions. Similarly, I have given an illustration, very simple illustration. When land acquisition officer decides about the compensation for land acquired, what is he doing? He is performing a judicial function. So an administrative officer is performing sort of a judicial functions. Typically, judicial functions are to be performed by judiciary, and therefore this type of function is stated to be quasi-judicial functions. So that is why we have slightly shifted from what Montesquieu thought was the doctrine of separation of power. In India, it is understood as one organ cannot usurp the functions assigned to the other unless Constitution permits. If you go to the Constitution, you will see that executive, that is the administrative authority, executive head is the president. Now, the president is performing certain legislative functions. President is also performing certain judicial functions. I have raised a query, and two queries are there in the end of this slide. Under our Constitution, executive power vests in whom? That I have already said, in the president. Article 53 for president of the union and 154 for the governor of the state. Then what about legislative power and judicial power? Are there any provisions in the Constitution, specific provisions that legislative power will vest in the parliament or state legislature, as the case may be, or judicial power will vest in Supreme Court or High Court? Kindly try to go back to Constitution and find out the answers. I'm right now not answering. Functions of administrative authorities now, as we saw that certain legislative functions are given to administrative authorities, which are called quasi-legislative. Certain judicial functions are to be performed, like land acquisition officer, so they are quasi-judicial. And then there are certain functions which are purely administrative. Now the question is, when they are performing only administrative functions, do they have to follow principles of natural justice? Administrative authorities when they are performing quasi-judicial functions, they will have to follow natural justice, which is crystal clear from what we have seen so far. But when they are performing purely administrative functions, are they supposed to follow principles of natural justice? Taking a simple, crude example, suppose the government issues permits under the Prohibition Act to those who have health problems for consuming alcohol. Now, when they issue such permits, they are performing only administrative functions. Do they have to follow natural justice? As against that, suppose I am granted the permit and the government cancels the permit, though the tenure of the permit is not over. Will they have to follow natural justice? These are the questions with which we have to look at the issue. I have therefore divided purely administrative functions into two parts, with functions with civil consequences and without civil consequences. There is a reason for it, which we'll come to know in the next slide. Again, next slide is a sort of a narration of what I already told you. Thus, but hurriedly, let me go through it. Thus, it is accepted that the administrative authorities perform purely administrative functions, legislative functions, and judicial functions. Natural justice are not required to be followed for legislative functions, because you can't hear each and every person of the country before passing a law. And similarly for rule-making power also, I mean, they are not bound to follow principles of natural justice. Natural justice will have to be followed by judiciary. Obviously, we know that our procedures provide for that. Natural justice will have to be followed by administrative authorities while performing judicial functions. We call it quasi-judicial functions. And I've then given illustrations of purely administrative functions, say order setting up of commission of inquiry, or order granting or refusing sanction to prosecute a public servant. These are all administrative functions. Do they have to follow? Next slide, please. This is a very important judgment, Ridge versus Baldwin. And if possible, please try to read this judgment as a whole, how this concept they have developed. Until Ridge versus Baldwin, the position was that it did not apply to purely administrative functions. That is, when the administrative authorities were not performing quasi-judicial functions, they were not bound to follow. That was the concept till Ridge versus Baldwin. But now, even an order having administrative character is required to be passed after following natural justice, if it is in capital, if it involves civil consequences to any party. I have narrated the facts. In a criminal case against the chief constable appointed by the watch committee of the borough in England, the trial court acquitted him. But the trial court censured his conduct and made certain observations against him. Based on those observations, he was dismissed for service without hearing. Under the relevant provision, the watch committee was empowered to suspend or dismiss any constable who the committee thought was negligent or unfit to discharge the duty. Now, the committee thought, it was argued on behalf of the committee that this gives us discretion. This falls in administrative domain. So we are not bound to follow natural justice. It was submitted by the watch committee that in dismissing, they are only performing administrative functions, to which this natural justice does not apply. The House of Lords, however, gave a principle that even if the action is under administrative power, natural justice will have to be followed if the exercise of such power affects a person's rights. So now, from administrative authorities performing quasi-judicial functions, they will have to follow natural justice. But administrative authorities performing administrative functions, again, that those functions are divided into two parts: functions which have civil consequences, functions which don't have civil consequences. That is how it has come to be accepted now. The next case is an Indian case, again, very important case. And Justice O. Chinnappa Reddy, in his book, The Court and Constitution, has spoken of these two judgments very highly. This Ridge versus Baldwin and State of Orissa versus Binapani De, Dr. Binapani De. Kindly see the last quotation. It is true that the order is administrative in character, but even an administrative order which involves civil consequences, as already stated, must be made consistently with the rules of natural justice after informing the first respondent of case of the state, the evidence in support thereof, and after giving an opportunity to the first respondent of being heard, admitting or explaining the evidence. So now, if you have to challenge an order, say an administrative order, you will have to try to find out that this order, does it have any adverse civil consequences on the petitioner? So this civil consequences was again elaborated by Justice Krishna Iyer in Mohinder Singh Gill's case. Please go to the next slide. What is what is civil consequences? It undoubtedly cover infraction of not merely property or personal rights, but of civil liberties, material deprivations, and non-pecuniary damage. In its comprehensive connotation, everything that affects a citizen in his civil life inflicts a civil consequence. Then I have again narrated, given the important cases, all of which are given in the volumes that are given to you. So, summary, if we take it, that is now the distinction between administrative and quasi-judicial functions is almost obliterated. Civil consequences, the term civil consequences has become important. Purely administrative order must comply with natural justice if it entails civil consequences on a party. And we know that natural justice is not a codified law. It is a judge-made law, and therefore it cannot be put in a straitjacket formula, which means that everything will depend on the facts of each case. This is about two constitutional principles. Now comes the question, what are these principles? And brief discussion on each of them. Today we are taking only the first one, absence of bias. It is also known as the doctrine of bias. Now, what are these? What are the propositions for this? What are the basis? What is the basis on which this principle is based? First is clear: no man shall be a judge in his own cause. The Latin is well known. Then two is justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done. People should feel that justice is done. What will people feel becomes important. And third, judges like Caesar's wife should be above suspicion. Now, why Caesar's wife? Because Caesar is said to have said that Caesar's wife should be above suspicion. Why did he say that? Because his wife Pompeia, she received negative publicity because of her affair with another person called Claudius. And because of that, Caesar divorced his wife. And when he took that decision, he's supposed to have said that Caesar's wife should be above suspicion, meaning thereby that the judges also should be above suspicion. Now, what is bias is mentioned. We know that. I have reproduced from the encyclopedic law lexicon of Justice C.K. Thakkar, whose book, Administrative Law, we all refer to with reverence. So that is about it. Then the jurists have divided bias into several parts. First part is pecuniary bias, that is the financial interest of the deciding authority. This would disqualify the authority from hearing the case. If he has slightest interest, financial interest in the subject matter or a party, ideally he should not hear the case. That is a very well-known principle. Way back in 1600, Dr. Bohan's case was in London without license from the college. The relevant statute provided that the half of the fine would go to the king and the remaining half would go to the college. Sir Edward Coke was the judge then, held that the college was now becoming a judge in its own cause. In a way, the college was interested in getting the half amount, and that is why someone else should have decided, not this type of, the college committee should not have decided. Next. Dimes is Grand Junction Canal Properties. This again is a famous case where a judge, trial court, the appellate court judge was a shareholder in the company whose case was before Lord Cottenham was the judge. And then from the appeal to House of Lords, from the judgment of Lord Cottenham, this is what they thought was the principle. They wanted to have to be a sort of a lesson to all inferior tribunals. This will be a lesson to all inferior tribunals to take care not only that in their decrees they are not influenced by their personal interest, but to avoid the appearance of laboring under such an influence. So this is how, even when the judge was a shareholder, even if his decision may not have been taken by bias, yet it was thought that he should not have heard the case. Indian case is of J. Mahapatra versus State of Orissa, where the selection committee for textbook of, I believe, 12th standard for the state, the members of the selection committee, they suggested their own books as textbooks. The Supreme Court said that they will get royalty, publishers will get royalty, they will benefit financially, and therefore they should not have participated in the selection, right? So next is the test given from various judgment is that slightest direct pecuniary interest in a party or subject matter should be enough to disqualify a judge from hearing the case. Now they have distinguished between direct and indirect financial interest. How is it the indirect financial interest will come to a little later. Again, the principle is that whether actual bias is there or not is not necessary to be shown. Direct financial interest itself is sufficient to disqualify a judge. One case is mentioned, then there are two issues in the form of questions that I have raised. First one, the judgment also is given. An interesting case was that there was a former head of Chile, country Chile. Now, Chile and Spain have good relations. So Spain applied for extradition because the former head was in London. So country of Spain applied for extradition of this former head of state from England to Spain. In the first round, such prayer was granted till House of Lords. House of Lords also confirmed. Then it was found out that one of the judges of House of Lords was a director in a human rights body, and that body was propagating a certain cause in which he was also involved. Thereafter, House of Lords gave a principle that this was enough to disqualify a judge from hearing that case. So even if it is a charity organization, and the judge is hearing a case in which charity organization is a party, then he should not hear the case. That human right body in this case was also a party to the case. So kindly read this judgment of Justice Browne Wilkinson. It's a beautifully written judgment. Justice Hope of Craighead has also given a judgment in that. Very nice judgment. Last is a question I am not going to answer. It is a question for brainstorming. What if a judge trying a criminal case for robbery is a shareholder in the complainant bank? Suppose there is a robbery in the bank and there is an accused and the judge is trying that robbery case and he's also a shareholder in the bank. Should he hear the case? That is the question. You can, from whatever we have discussed or from your books, you can find out the answer. Next is, so this is about pecuniary bias or financial bias. Next is personal bias. Now, personal bias, what do we mean by that? Personal bias is, very difficult to prove. It is a state of mind. How will you prove a state of mind? Very difficult. So they gave us a test, real likelihood of bias. What will people think? Justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done. That is why people's mind becomes important. Actual bias, whether it is there or not, obviously is not necessary. You are not going to be able to prove whether a person is having a soft corner for me, or whether a person, the judge is having some enmity against me. It is not going to be possible. So what will people feel? That is the important question. There are some cases. Let us hurriedly go through. This is a clear-cut. First case is a very simple and clear-cut case of personal bias. In a departmental inquiry, the inquiry officer himself, that is the judge himself, gave evidence at 2 stages against the respondent. When his evidence was recorded, of course, he vacated the judge's seat and allowed it to be recorded by some other high officer. But then after his evidence was recorded, he again decided against the respondent. Supreme Court said that this is shocking our norms of judicial propriety. A judge becoming a witness, that is not permissible. Next is a tricky situation and a very famous case, just A.K. Kripek versus Union of India. Justice Heggde's judgment, again a very important judgment. Kindly see the facts. I want to devote a couple of minutes on this case. Acting Inspector General of Forest. So he was not actual Inspector General of Forest, but an acting inspector. So in charge Inspector General of Forest was a candidate for selection to the Indian Forest Service. So he was a candidate for selection and also the ex officio member, because he was Inspector General. He was an ex officio member of the selection board. By virtue of his post, he was the member of the selection board. They deliberated on the candidates. When his name was considered by the selection board, he did not participate in the deliberations. So he went out. However, ultimately he was selected and placed at the top of the list. Supreme Court said that this is improper. And there the Supreme Court also gave this idea that the dividing line between administrative power and judicial power is quite thin and is being gradually obliterated. For determining whether a power is administrative or judicial one has to look to the nature of power, the persons on whom it is conferred, the framework of law conferring such power, the consequences ensuing from such exercise, and the manner in which it is expected to be exercised. The last point is important. The real question is not whether he was biased, because it is difficult to prove the state of mind. There must be a reasonable likelihood of bias. So pausing here, kindly see that in pecuniary bias, financial bias, direct pecuniary interest is the test, whereas in personal bias, reasonable likelihood of bias is the test. Here, there was a reasonable likelihood of the other candidates feeling that he was instrumental in giving them less marks, though he may not have remained present when his performance was evaluated. So the candidate who was selected did not remain present when his evaluation was made, but he did remain present when others were evaluated. So in a way, people are likely to feel that he is instrumental in giving others less marks. That is how the bias was held to be sufficient enough to, quash his selection. This is a very important case. Also, please go through the judgment. Next is again a question which you will be able to answer after going through this judgment. This judgment we have not included in the volume, but please go through this judgment. Here, Kripak's case, the previous case was cited. Kindly see the facts. Selection for the post of assistant professor in a medical college. The criteria was written test, which had 85% weightage, plus viva was, that is interview, for 15%. The principal was the ex officio member of the viva was committee. His daughter was the candidate. He did not remain present when she was interviewed, but ultimately she was selected. Is her selection bad? That is the question which is answered in this judgment. Obviously, you will come to know that Kripak is discussed, and slight change in the facts will change the ultimate decision. That also you will be able to notice. Next are two cases. First one is Institute of Chartered Accountants versus KL Ratna, where again it's a case of personal bias. For want of time, please read the judgment. We may not discuss. The last case is arising from Gujarat High Court, and that is why let me briefly give the facts. There was a lower court judge against whom there were allegations of misconduct. Now you know that High Court also has an administrative side, and misconduct is, the inquiry is held against this judge. Judges will sit in the inquiry on their administrative side. So sitting on the administrative side, our Gujarat High Court judge held him guilty of misconduct. Now that administrative decision can be challenged by way of a writ petition. It was challenged. It came up before a division bench in which the same judge was one of the parties, in the sense that a person who decided on administrative side now had to decide on judicial side. Now, is it proper? And Supreme Court said that this is not proper. It is personal bias. You have taken a view on your administrative side. Now you are deciding the same issue on judicial side. How is it permissible? Supreme Court quashed the decision of the authority, the decision of the administrative side of the High Court. So this is about personal bias. Kindly mark two things. In financial interest or financial bias, we need to prove direct, or we need to show direct financial interest. Actual bias, again, you can't prove. So only show direct financial interest. What are the contours of that financial interest? We have seen through cases. So far as personal interest is concerned, personal bias is concerned, we have to show real likelihood of bias. That real likelihood is sufficient to disqualify the person. Next is official bias, that is also called departmental interest. Jurists say that this is rarely a ground to vitiate the proceeding, because the authority is, because of the policy of the state, he is interested in promoting the policy of the state. So he is bound to take a particular view. That is called departmental interest. It is not going to vitiate the proceeding. But you can show two things. One, non-application of mind. And two, the authority acting under the dictates of the superior. Go back to the last case on that. No, the previous slide. Mahadayal versus CTO. Here, the assistant officer decided that a particular goods were taxable or not on the basis of the opinion that he received from the superior. His superior told him that these goods are covered under taxable provisions, so you tax him. So he decided on the basis of superior, what superior said. That is why this is not proper. That is what Supreme Court said. And then there are two judgments, A and B, with the same name. The name is same because there was a scheme of nationalization of road transport business in Andhra Pradesh. It was drafted by the secretary. The scheme provided that objections will be heard and decided by the secretary himself. So the person who was the drafter of the scheme, draftsman of the scheme, he himself became a judge for deciding the objections. So Supreme Court said that that was not. What they did was they changed the scheme, they modified the scheme. And now instead of the secretary, the minister was to hear the objections. So the person framing the scheme was one person, and the person hearing the objections was going to be a different person. Supreme Court said that this is permissible. So names of issue is that the person who frames the scheme cannot hear the objections. Someone else can hear. So if we are for the respondent, one way to get away from this allegation of bias is that you can advise the client to have two separate committees. One for framing the scheme, the other for deciding the objections, right? So that is where this allegation you can avoid. Next is a peculiar situation. In this case, for the first time, Supreme Court gave this concept of bias from judicial obstinacy. It's a before that we have not heard of this kind of a separate bias. Only three types of biases were found in the textbook: official bias, the financial bias, personal bias, and official bias. This is a new kind of bias. See the facts. The judgment of the single judge granting promotion and arrears was overruled by the division bench with a direction to the state for a fresh consideration regarding promotion in accordance with law. So we find that matters are remanded for fresh consideration. This was one such case. Promotion was granted. Thereafter, he filed another petition claiming arrears on the basis of the single judge's previous judgment. Now, it came up before another division bench, wherein the first single judge was the presiding judge. And second division bench virtually rewrote the overruled judgment. So the judgment, the single judge decided in a particular way, it was overruled by the division bench. Second round of litigation started. That went to division bench. In that, the first judge was one of the parties, and he said he followed his own instinct and decided in accordance with his own view in the first case. Supreme Court said that this is a new form of bias, and it is called bias as to judicial obstinacy. So this is a new concept that we are getting in recent times. Then there is a recent judgment. I do not propose to, because it's a recent judgment, very much in the news. Can a judge sit in the larger bench to which a question is referred when the judge was part of a smaller panel of judges whose judgment is referred? So that is how this judgment is given. And Justice Arti, if one judge was a party to the single judges, the smaller panel which took a particular view, there is no problem in sitting in the division or the larger bench. Lastly, what must be shown for bias? Next slide. And we are almost through for today. Reasonable apprehension in the mind of reasonable persons with cogent materials to show likelihood of bias. Vague suspicions are not enough. Then there are situations where rule against bias will not apply. One is waiver. suppose the judge discloses that I am a shareholder in a particular company, it's a plaintiff or defendant, then nobody takes objection at that time. Then you are supposed to have waived your right to object. Later on, you can't object on the ground that, look, he was the shareholder. So it's called waiver. And second is doctrine of necessity. Judgments are there. You will be able to read, but let me simply say that in one of the English cases, the facts were that the question before the court was whether judge's salary was taxable or not. This is a case of some West Indian island and in England. The facts were that whether he is taxable or not. The question is who will decide that question. Judges themselves will have to decide that question. That is called doctrine of necessity. One such illustration is given in Tata Cellular's case. I've given the facts of the case. And this is how about the question of bias. Now, the third or fourth, maybe fourth PDF you can show where some questions are there. Forget about the first. I want to end with a question. No, the previous. Richard Cheney versus District Court. Now, Cheney was a vice president of USA when George W. Bush was the president. Justice Scalia was very well acquainted with this Dick Cheney, Richard Cheney, because they were working together in the administration of President Ford. So they were very close to each other. At that time, Scalia was not a judge. Cheney was not the vice president. So what happened was that as vice president, Cheney was the head of a government committee that allegedly did not comply with some Federal Advisory Committee Act. The plaintiff, Sierra Club, filed a suit in the trial court to direct the defendants, including Cheney, as the head of the committee to disclose certain information about environment-related issues. The trial court and appellate court held in favor of the plaintiff. So Cheney was directed, Cheney as the head of the committee was directed to disclose this information. They have Freedom of Information Act under which you have to file a suit in the district court in USA. Then you have to follow that procedure, not going straight away to the high court. So they filed a suit, they succeeded, appellate court also held in their favor. Now when the case was pending before the courts below, there was a Christmas break and Justice Scalia had booked a hunting trip to Louisiana. He was fond of hunting. Cheney was also fond of hunting. And they both were together in the trip, in the hunting trip, in the state of Louisiana, down south. So obviously, after the trial court and appellate court verdict, Cheney appealed to Supreme Court. And it came up in US Supreme Court, all 9 judges sit together. A request was made that Justice Scalia and Cheney, they are close to each other, and Justice Scalia should recuse from hearing. Ultimately, final decision was by 7-2 majority in favor of Cheney, in the sense that the matter was again remanded to the appellate court. The judgment was authored by Justice Kennedy, not Justice Scalia. But Justice Scalia separately wrote a memorandum. That also, if anyone is interested, please let me know. It's a very nicely written memorandum of 21 pages explaining why he would not recuse. The gist of the reasons was that Cheney was not a party in his personal capacity, but official capacity. So that is how they distinguished. If Cheney was personally involved in the case, then probably the issue would be different. Then Justice Scalia would have thought of recusing, that means. But here he was acting in the official capacity. And therefore he said that it is not necessary for him to recuse himself. This is a decision worth keeping in mind, because we may see many such cases happening later on. Lastly, I will end with a question. What if a judge is a Facebook friend of a lawyer who is appearing before him in a case? Should he recuse? You can find out from the internet the possible views. I'm not going to answer. Let us end with a question. Our professor in Columbia Law School always used to raise a question, end the class with a question. And he would say that enjoy the question. We live with the question so that we do some brainstorming. Please, last page of my favorite author, Rilke, which I sent in the morning. Last Adichillu. See, be patient towards all that is unreal. Rilke was a poet, German poet, and his book Letters to a Young Poet. There are 90 pages, and all letters are beautiful. They are important for creative thinking also. He says that be patient towards all that is unresolved in your heart, and try to love the questions themselves, like locked rooms and like books that are now written in a very foreign tongue. Do not now seek the answers. So please don't find instant answers, which cannot be given to you because you would not be able to live them. The point is to live everything. So live with the question, enjoy the questions. As and when Archit fixes another meeting, I'll be happy to discuss other principles. I know it is sort of a revision. Some very elementary things were discussed, but I'm sure it will be of help to everyone, particularly since volumes of judges are given for judgments. Thank you very much. Archit?
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. Sir, can we have few question and answer sessions?
Yes.
Can you take few questions? There are, if any participants have any question, they can unmute themselves and questions can be asked.
अमर
हाँ
Percy.
Hi Percy.
खूब मजा आई.
अच्छा.
Now we know why you are such a popular lecturer, and I think I speak for everybody when I say
This is just
આપણે ના બનાવવાળા હતા તો we would have probably been better lawyers.
ના એવું નથી. એવું નથી, પણ આપણે ખાલી બધું કવર કરવાનું હતું.
I'll do the homework which you have given and we'll meet again. I just wanted to point out to our fellow audiences.
Yes.
Come back, Darshan bhai. Mohammad Noo's case is very important for another reason, because it gives the idea that in a writ of prohibition, alternative remedy is not necessary to be invoked.
Yes.
In fact, for practitioners, we use that. I had also pointed that out, and I think so. Mohammad Noo is a very important judgment because it's a constitutional bench judgment.
Yes.
And it has this principle also.
But because
આપણે discuss, આપણે વાંચીને હું discuss કરીશ પછી.
એટલે 226 માં we can go discuss that, but there are this is from administrative law point of view, natural justice.
Thank you very much, Amar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Over to you, Archit.
Yes, thank you, sir. Saurabh sir, you were going to say something.
No, I was going to congratulate Amar for beautifully exposing the whole spectrum of law, and we wait for the second session, which you say is going to be fixed somewhere within a couple of days.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Saurabh bhai. Pranam.
Thank you.
But I thought that we should do some basics also. That is why.
No, this is very, very important, because in our attempt to find out judgments to fit our cases, frankly, I find that our desire to learn the law, especially evolution of law, is lost. If we want to learn the law, the only way we can learn the law is to go step by step, trace historically, and find out as to how the law has developed. Only then we'll be able to understand nuances of law, which you have done it very beautifully. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
detailed and thorough.
Hello.
I am Prakash speaking.
Prakash bhai.
Yes, I joined Saurabh in congratulating you because you have started from BC so and so years till 2020. So a great effort is made, a detailed search is made, and detailed survey of the entire case law, not only of India, but of America and England is made. Lot of hard work is put up by you. My heartiest congratulations.
Thank you, Prakash bhai. Thank you. बस अर्चित है कोई
So there is one question by Mr. Harish Metalia.
Yes.
It's on
decree is passed.
Decree is passed.
But that will be governed by Civil Procedure Code, Order 21. I think after the decree is passed, you have to execute the decree, and in execution, if it is beyond a particular period, I forget the exact period, probably 1 year, then first notice is issued and then the decree is executed. So there probably Civil Procedure Code itself provides for such procedure. It might be included depending on the facts of the case. If the decree is passed and you are checked, then there is no need. Straight away, decree can be executed. Otherwise, beyond 1 year, they, I think, issue notice first. They hear the parties and proceed for execution.
Very well articulated, Kumar.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bus? Hello. Hello. Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
Sir, you one decision of the Supreme Court regarding an inquiry officer. That
yes.
Inquiry officer cannot be
yes.
a witness of himself.
Yes.
As he being a judge. Now the question is whether the inquiry officer can put up a question to the witness.
Yes, that is, even judges put questions. If he is sitting as a judge, he can certainly, I mean, the idea is to elicit truth, and therefore he can certainly ask those questions. But not,
so
he can't be, by asking a question, he doesn't become a witness. He's only trying to elicit facts, right?
So by the steps to the shoes of a lawyer,
that is not prohibited. You see, the question of bias will not be there merely by asking questions. We are here. I cited this judgment on the principle of bias. See, judge becomes a witness. If judge becomes a witness, then you know that then he decides based on his own evidence. So he is becoming a party in his own cause. The idea of bias is the first principle, that a judge should not be a party in his own cause. So he is a judge. When he asks the question, is he becoming party in his own cause? Answer is no. So you have to go on the first basic proposition why bias concept has been developed. First concept is that a person cannot be a judge in his own cause. If he becomes witness and he decides on the basis of his evidence, he is becoming a party in his own cause. But when he is only asking a question, he is not becoming a party in his own cause.
Okay, fine. Thank you, sir.
Saurabh, hello.
Yeah.
Hello. Amar bhai, I am Saurabh Mehta speaking.
Saurabh bhai.
Sir, I am having one question. That nowadays there are so many orders passed by our High Court that after hearing, since there is a violation of principle of natural justice, therefore the order is quashed and set aside. But after hearing the parties, they are the respondents are open. It is open for the respondent to pass appropriate orders.
Yes.
Now we all are. It is known fact that it is only merely a procedure of hearing the parties.
Yes.
It's a formality. So what are the parameters that under which we can say that the principle of natural justice are not properly followed?
Yes, that we are going to discuss in the second class or second webinar.
Okay.
Because These
Sure,
issues,
sir, sure.
what is the effect of the order? Whether it is only procedural
Yes.
impropriety, if procedural impropriety is corrected, then after hearing, if order is passed, whether it is permissible, all these issues will fall under concept of hearing, contours of hearing, that we'll discuss as and when the next meeting is fixed.
Thank you. We are eagerly waiting for next session, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello.
Yeah. Bolo, Shaili.
Sir, this is Shaili.
Bolo.
Sir, after such a long time, it was a revision. કોલેજમાં ડિસ્કશન કર્યા પછી આજે બહુ જ વર્ષો પછી સેમ સબ્જેક્ટ ધી ઓનલી મિસિંગ થિંગ ઇઝ ત્યારે અર્ચિતભાઈની સ્લાઇડ્સ હોત ને તો perhaps we would have been able to achieve much more marks. Thank you so much to you and Archit bhai both. It was very informative, very refreshing, and we have gained great knowledge today morning. Thank you, sir. We are eagerly waiting for a next session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Jigar bhai, do you have a question? Jigar bhai, we are unable to hear you. Can you post your questions on the chat box?
Nothing સંભળાતું.
Nothing સંભળાતું sir. There is some issue. We can end here, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.